Windy City, the capital of the Midwest. Home to about 2.7 million people, it's the third largest city in the United States. Millions of tourists come here every year to see skyscrapers and attend the buzzing festivals. It has the second largest and oldest subway system in the country and some of the busiest railroad hubs. But what do we know about underground Chicago? There's a maze of tunnels, hidden passageways, and even secret rooms that once served as hideouts beneath its streets. And today we're going to delve into these mysterious underground layers and unravel what lies beneath Chicago. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel to see lots of exciting content. We are on the famous Lake Street, one of the main arterial roads of early Chicago. The city's first church, the first hotel, and the city tavern were built there. It was here on the corner of Market Street that one of the most significant events of the United States took place in 1860, when 10,000 people gathered in Wigwam Hall to nominate Abraham Lincoln for the presidency. But history is not only all around us, it's right under our feet. Wait, right under Lake Street? That's right, let's take a look. Like most of Chicago's busy roads, Lake Street has a composite pavement. It's like a layered cake. On top there's 5 to 7 centimeters, 1.5 to 2.7 inches of asphalt. Among other things, it serves as a protective coating for the underlaying layer. It absorbs most of the impact from vehicles and weather conditions. Underneath is a 15 to 20 centimeter, 6 to 7.8 inches thick concrete base that ensures the strength and stability of the entire structure. Let's dip down just below the pavement to a depth of up to 30 centimeters, 12 inches. This is where the ground should start, but no, we see some old boards that look like parquet flooring fragments. Where do they come from? Straight from the 19th century. Long before Chicago existed, the whole area was carved with trails. Trails helped indigenous people and the first settlers evade swamps and flooded lands. Then Chicago was founded, its population grew, the city evolved, and the trails were used by countless farmers bringing their goods to the city. Naturally, during the rainy season, the old trails became a muddy mess. How did the people here cope with this? They built wooden alleys by putting wooden decks on top of the ground. In the 7 years from 1848 to 1855, almost $150,000 was spent on them. Today, that amount would equal to almost $5,500,000. At first, the idea seemed groundbreaking compared to dirt roads, which were falling apart quickly. The boardwalk seemed like a real relief. But then the problem began. The permanent humidity caused the wood to warp and rot. To prolong the life of the roads, drainage ditches were dug along the edges to drain the water and reduce the accumulation of dirt. But even with these measures, the wooden roads lasted only a couple of years. Soon, most of them became so inconvenient and dangerous that the authorities decided to build new roads right on top of them. Well, it's time for us to see what's further down there. Gas lines are typically buried between 30 and 61 centimeters, 12 to 24 inches deep. Telephone and internet cables are a little deeper, between 65 and 90 centimeters, 25 and 35 inches. These lines provide telephone and internet service to residential homes and offices. Though you won't see them as you stroll the streets of Chicago, you can rest assured that the damage to even one of these lines may entail far-reaching implications. If we look deeper at 90 to 122 centimeters, 36 to 48 inches, we will see major high-voltage power lines that feed city blocks. Deepest of all, 1.6 to 1.8 meters, 4 to 6 feet underground, are water mains. This depth protects them from freezing in winter. However, utilities aren't the only thing we find here. A few centimeters below, about 2 meters, 6.5 feet, beneath the ground, we can see a true engineering wonder. We're under Lake Street at the foundation of the building. At first glance, it looks like a typical foundation, nothing special. But it's the real wonder, because it was finished after the building had been built. Hard to believe? And yet, it's true. Imagine, it's the middle of the 19th century. At the time, the Chicago area was just above the level of neighboring Lake Michigan. There were virtually no drainage systems and the city streets literally stood in water. The problem was so acute that foundation reinforcement alone wouldn't have worked. So what did the Chicago engineers decide to do? They decided to lift entire buildings, and then they'd build new foundations underneath them. So in 1858, Chicago became the first city in the world where a brick 4-story building was raised by as much as 1.8 meters, 6 feet. It wasn't done with cranes or any other advanced technology, but with 200 jacks. And if you think that this is a unique case, you're wrong. In Chicago, the same technique was used to lift an entire residential block. This happened 2 years later, in 1860, and it took a bit more jacks, namely 6,000. But the most amazing fact is that life in the block never stopped for a moment during the entire process. Just imagine, buyers continue to shop, mailmen deliver the morning paper, while the entire block is being slowly lifted off the ground and practically hanging in the air. After discovering such an extraordinary event, it's time to reveal another, no less interesting mystery of underground Chicago. Let's continue our journey downward. Are we in some sort of basement? No, it's an underground bar beneath the earth at a depth of around 2.5 meters, 8 feet. In the 1920s, Chicago was saturated with a web of such places, with a particularly large number of them in the city's downtown area. These were Chicago's speakeasies, places where alcohol was sold on the sly, and all conversations were held in an ambience of hiding and secrecy. Why? The 1920s in America were the days of prohibition, when the sale of alcohol was strictly forbidden. But bans only fueled interest, and so there were places where people could buy alcoholic beverages illegally. And each such hideout had its unique, inexpressible vibe. Let's take a look at the Green Door Tavern on Orleans Street. This is one of the oldest buildings in Chicago, built in 1872 after the fire. The Green Door was originally a humble grocery store, but during Prohibition, its owners didn't want to miss their chance and turned it into an underground bar. Note the name of the spot. It's not just a random name. During Prohibition, if the door of the establishment was painted in green, it was a sign that it was a speakeasy. Want to see more? How about the Gold Star Bar on W Division Street, which has been around since the 1920s? This place is still rumored to have ghosts, with many visitors claiming to have encountered unexplained phenomena in this old basement. Another famous speakeasy is Simon's Tavern in Chicago's Swedish neighborhood of Andersonsville. Once you descend into this underground bar, you'll find yourself aboard the fancy liner Normandy. And remember, more than a century ago, a cruise on this ship was not accessible for most people. So the real hard workers, the blue-collar workers who gathered here after work, could feel themselves in a real beau monde. But let's face it, there was always danger lurking around every carefree party at the speakeasy. Police raids could happen at any moment. So what helped? Secret tunnels. Some Chicago speakeasies were part of a complex system of tunnels that helped escape the police. We'll talk about these tunnels later. And now, ready for the next stop of our underground journey? Then let's go to a depth of 3.5 meters, 11.5 feet. Welcome to the Chicago Pedway, a system of underground passages and tunnels located literally beneath the feet of Chicagoans. It was created in 1951 and addressed a crucial issue: protecting people from the unbearable Chicago weather. Yes, Chicago weather can be harsh. And while a blizzard blows or heavy rain pours down on the surface, you're walking through dry and warm hallways connecting subway stations, offices and stores. Not bad, right? It all started with a couple of tunnels between the stations of the red and blue lines. These were simply connecting hallways built for convenience. Over the years, however, the network has grown to encompass more than 40 blocks and 60 buildings, and its total length is now just over 8 kilometers, 5 miles. But Pedway doesn't have identical tunnels, as you might have imagined. Each section of the system is held by different owners. As a result, the design, lighting and even temperature can change significantly as you walk through the tunnels. It's as if you were moving between different worlds. For example, the sections connecting the subway stations might look quite plain. However, in the hallway beneath Macy's, you will find stunning Victorian-style stained glass windows created in collaboration with the Stained Glass Museum. This is not just an underground passage, but it's a real art gallery. And that's not all. Pedway is a real city under the city. Here you can visit cafes, stroll through the stores, and go to the cinema, or even check out the fitness center's pool. As you wander through this maze, you can take a peek at the Chicago Cultural Center with its iconic Tiffany dome, the largest in the world, or take the golden elevator to one of the art galleries. The Pedway itself can be considered the city's cultural heritage. Artists and designers exhibit their work here, hold pop-up performances, exhibitions and installations. Graffiti thrives on the walls, while dead ends and little-used tunnel breaches turn into unique exhibition spaces. But not everything in the garden is rosy. With all the advantages of Pedway, its main problem remains: extreme complexity and lack of proper navigation. Do you want to spend hours looking for a way out? Then this is the place for you. The Pedway is notorious for being easy to get lost in, with over 200 entrances and exits, outdated signs, and no unified map navigation is a real challenge, even for locals, let alone tourists. The problem was best summarized by the Chicago Tribune. Bring some magic to Chicago's Pedway, or at least some maps. And while the mayor's office deals with navigation in the Pedway hallways, we're moving on. And soon we'll be in pitch black darkness. Where are we? Wires on the ground? Some letters? Is it a subway? No, it's a special network of freight tunnels, 12 meters, 40 feet beneath the city. Back in the middle of the last century, these tunnels stretched 95 kilometers, 60 miles under the city, and were a critical part of Chicago's infrastructure. And it all started in 1899 when the Illinois Telephone and Telegraph Company received permission from the city to dig tunnels for telephone cables. At the time, no one imagined that the tunnel's purpose would soon change radically. Just a few years later, in 1903, Illinois Telephone got permission to use the tunnels for freight transportation. And so, the telephone company decided to retrofit the underground tunnels by adding railroad tracks for the transportation of cables and mail. That's when a real construction fever began under Chicago. Construction work was running around the clock, and on average about 3.2 kilometers, 1.8 miles of tunnels were built per year. A typical tunnel was oval-shaped, 2.3 meters, 7.5 feet high, and 1.8 meters, 6 feet wide, with thick concrete walls. Larger segments used for main lines were up to 4.3 meters, 14 feet high, and 3.9 meters, 10 feet wide. Can you see the dumps of blue clay? Small freight cars, originally pulled by mules, were used to remove it. The same cars were also ingeniously used for ventilation inside the tunnels. Their movement forced air to circulate through the system. In their peak years in the 1930s and 1940s, the tunnels were used to deliver coal, mail and goods directly into the basements of the buildings so that the city could avoid additional traffic congestion. Cargoes were taken from the tunnels to the surface or to the basements of the buildings via special elevator shafts. There were a lot of funny stories about these shafts. The thing is that the construction workers laid the tunnels with little or no consultation with the city agencies. They simply dug whatever they thought they should, so that eventually underground passages could come to the surface in practically every second house. Residents joked at the time, any day now you might get a knock on your basement door with the news. Now you have freight service. Quite surprising, right? However, the tunnel boom gradually subsided. Underground freight cars eventually lost their competition for delivering goods to conventional trucks. The latter simply could carry more goods at a time, and the whole underground system began to lose its relevance. In 1959, freight transportation in the tunnels was permanently discontinued. The cars were scrapped, and the tunnels themselves began to be gradually forgotten. But in 1992, the tunnels under the city of Chicago came back into the spotlight. During construction work near the river, workers accidentally broke through one of the tunnels. Millions of gallons of water rushed into the underground network. The result? Hundreds of flooded buildings, damaged city infrastructure. The total damage amounted to $2 billion. Yes, the forgotten tunnel network continues to remind people of itself, and sometimes in a very dramatic way. And it's not just the floods. Long before their heyday, tunnels were already a favorite hideout for Chicago Mafia thugs. Let's go back to the late 1920s, the Prohibition era. At the time, Chicago was a real criminal hub. The gang of one of the most notorious criminals of the 20th century, Al Capone, was ruling there. Together with his henchmen, he used a network of tunnels under the city for his criminal operations, smuggling of alcohol and money raids. Tunnels helped members of the Mafia not only suddenly appear in the right places, but also instantly escape from the police by hiding under the city. This was highly convenient. It is believed that at the time, the tunnels could connect Mafia centers to key city buildings, including municipal institutions, courthouse, city hall, and even assembly hall. In 1998, a Chicago electrician accidentally drilled through a wall in a basement of a steakhouse and discovered a hidden room just above the bar. It was later discovered that the room had a secret exit to an underground tunnel system. But who would need this tricky escape route? This story took place in Harry Caray's Italian steakhouse. The house was once a haven for the Mafia. In the 20s, one of Al Capone's gang members, Frank Nitti, lived in the same building. He settled in an apartment on the 4th floor with his wife, whose family owned the building. A great hideout, you'd agree. The windows overlooked the city courthouse, keeping Nitti abreast of all the current events. And this is not a unique case. In some restaurants and buildings, you can still spot secret doors leading to underground mazes. Today, however, most of these tunnels are closed and sealed, and it's against the law to enter them. Only workers and city service representatives can go down into them. So if you want to fully explore Chicago's underground, keep in mind that only officials or construction workers are allowed to access some places. Wait, what's that loud rumbling sound below us? Let's dive a little deeper. We are in the subway at Clark Lake Station, about 20 meters under the ground, deep beneath Lake Street, where we started our journey. In front of you is a unique 3-level station, one of the biggest transport hubs in the city. It connects the surface level simultaneously to the Union Elevated Railroad line and the underground Milwaukee-Dearborn line. Welcome to the Chicago Loop. At the turn of the 20th century, Chicago's public transportation system started to develop at breakneck speed. In 1892, the first elevated railroad service opened, known as the Chicago L. However, until the 1940s, all metro lines either ran at street level or were elevated on trestles. That's right, the subway as we know it now simply didn't exist at the time. Things changed in 1943. That year, the first subway line, the State Street Subway, which is now part of the Red Line, opened. The underground section finally made it possible for residents of the South and West Side districts to get downtown faster. And Chicago didn't stop there. In 1951, the Dearborn Street Subway Blue Line was completed, running under the river and parallel to State Street. The aforementioned freight tunnels were used for construction. It made the process much easier and allowed to save on materials. Over time, the Chicago L became one of the most sophisticated subway systems in America. However, it also had its share of dramatic stories. In 2002, Joseph Konopka, better known as Dr. Chaos, used the old tunnels under the Blue Line subway for his sinister plans. He used the abandoned underground rooms as a hideout where he stored deadly chemicals, sodium cyanide and potassium cyanide. Konopka would force open doors and change locks so he could have free access to the tunnels. He involved teenagers in his work to help him get access to more and more subway rooms, telling them that what he was doing was urban research. In the end, Konopka was arrested and the hidden substances were seized before he could implement his plan. No one ever found out what exactly the plan was. And when asked by the judge why he'd gone on his vandalism, Konopka replied, "I've several reasons, but no real good reason." Yes, the underground tunnels beneath Chicago are full of stories and legends. But if you think we've already made it to the lowest level, think again. We're going even deeper. At a depth of about 25 meters, 75 feet, the underground section of the multi-level highway runs underneath Chicago. We're on Lower Wacker Drive, the lowest level of Chicago's traffic artery. This underground tunnel was completed in 1926 and instantly became one of the city's major roadways. Initially, Lower Wacker was designed to relieve the street on the surface. All delivery services, garbage disposal, and other utility needs of the city were diverted here. Soon the public became aware of it and began using it as a free parking area for cars and bicycles. Then homeless people settled on the dead ends of the offshoots of Lower Wacker. And then came the racers. They hold their races at night away from prying eyes. Though they may not be seen, they're perfectly heard. Races gather crowds of spectators, and the screeching of tires could be heard up to the top floors of city buildings. One video posted on social media shows cars whizzing around a ring of fire, completely stopping traffic on the entire Lower Wacker. Well, maybe they just want to replicate someone else's famous stunts. After all, the dark, winding tunnels of Lower Wacker Drive have repeatedly become the set for Hollywood movies. Here, Batman rushes on his legendary tumbler in The Dark Knight, chasing the Joker. And it's here where brothers Jake and Elwood swiftly escape from the police chase in The Blues Brothers. Yes, speeding down Lower Wacker is one hell of an adventure. But it's time to move on. We've almost reached our last stop. We go deeper and deeper until we're at the depth of around 90 meters, 295 feet. This underground infrastructure is something many people don't even know about. It's the system known as the Tunnel and Reservoir Plan, TARP, or simply deep tunnels. What? Tunnels again? Yes, but without them, Chicago wouldn't survive as a city. Billions of gallons of rainwater and sewage are collected here until they are treated and discharged. Remember the flooding problems Chicago has experienced since its founding? They started back in the 19th century and quickly became simply disastrous. Sewage was flowing directly into Lake Michigan, where the city's drinking water came from, and the flooding of the city led to disease epidemics. As a result, the city authorities implemented an idea unique in its scale. They turned the flow of Chicago River in the opposite direction, sending it toward the Mississippi River. But not even that helped. By the middle of the 20th century, it became clear that the problem had to be solved radically. So the idea of TARP was born, a colossal underground complex that would prevent flooding and protect the city from pollution. Gradually, starting in 1975, 4 huge tunnel systems were constructed. The tunnels themselves could reach a diameter of 10 meters, 33 feet. Construction took several decades, and by 2006, the tunnels could hold almost 9 billion liters, 1.97 billion gallons of water. And the system has not only helped prevent new floods, it's also greatly improved the environment. Thanks to TARP, rivers and lakes near Chicago have become cleaner, and dozens of fish and amphibian species have returned to them. But the project isn't finished yet. By 2029, Chicago Mayor's Office plans to build additional reservoirs that will allow the system to hold up to 64 billion liters, 17 billion gallons of water. This will make it one of the most efficient wastewater control systems in the world.